So today we'll start talking about different ways of invoking Apex. Invoking Apex means executing Apex. So what are the different ways of executing Apex? We have worked with a few of them. We have already worked with Visual Force controllers, which are written in Apex, and we have also worked with Apex triggers. Okay, so we call Apex through triggers, and we have called Apex on the Visual Force page. There are a few more ways of calling an Apex. How do we do that? So what are the different ways of invoking Apex? Let's have a quick look into what are the different ways of invoking Apex. The first one is an anonymous code block. Okay, an anonymous code block is just a code block which is not a part of a class or a method. Okay, which is not stored in not stored as a metadata in my Salesforce org. Okay, I just write some code and I execute it, and it's a one-time execution of it. Usually what happens with a class or a method, it's stored and it's used again and again. But an anonymous code block is something which you can just write on the fly and use it. Okay, that's one way. I'll show you how to use that. Okay, the other thing is Apex triggers. So we have already worked with Apex triggers. We know how Apex triggers work. Third way of invoking Apex is Visual Force classes. This is also something which we have done. So we know how to work with Visual Force classes, right? The fourth is asynchronous Apex. Okay, what is asynchronous Apex? Asynchronous Apex is an Apex, method or Apex code which does not get executed synchronously. Okay, what is synchronous and what is asynchronous? So try and understand this. Let me give you a simple example. When you click on a button, and that button has some method written in the backend for it. When you click on the button, the code gets executed instantly, right? At that very moment. Okay, and the method is called and the code gets executed instantly. When you load a page, the code which is written, that gets executed instantly. So these codes are getting executed in sync with the end user action when the user loads a page, or when he clicks on a button, or when he saves a record. So these are all synchronous Apex, whatever we have done so far. Trigger, button, Visual Force page loading, these are all synchronous Apex. Okay, the Apex gets executed in sync with the end user action. When I load the page, Apex executes in the backend. When I click on the button, instantly the Apex executes in the backend. Okay, so it does not happen that you click on the button and the code will get executed after 2 hours. That does not happen, right? But in some cases we need asynchronous Apex. Asynchronous Apex is something which runs on its own thread in the backend without any action from the end user. Okay, so why do we need those things and where do we need those things? We're going to talk about that. I'll just come to that. So there are 4 different ways of asynchronous Apex. One is called a future method. I'll talk about these in details. One is called Queueable Apex, one is Apex scheduler, one is batch Apex. These are different Apex ways of invoking Apex which can run in the backend, and these do not work in sync with the end user action. Okay, they work in the backend. That is the reason why these are called asynchronous Apex. All right, there's one more way of invoking Apex, that is using an Apex email service. Now what is that Apex email service? Apex email service is a functionality in Salesforce which allows you to execute an Apex code when you receive an email. Okay, so this is again another way. This is not asynchronous, but this is one more way of using Apex. Right, so what happens is Salesforce provides you with an email ID. Whenever an email is received on that email ID, Apex code can get executed. Okay, so no one is clicking on a button or nothing like that is happening. Okay, so these are different ways of invoking Apex. So anonymous code block, triggers, Visual Force classes, we know these things, we have worked on these things. There are a few ways of invoking Apex asynchronously: future methods, Queueable Apex, Apex scheduler, batch Apex, and Apex email services. Okay, so these are different ways of invoking Apex. Now First of all, let's understand about the anonymous code block. What is that? Okay. uh, Anonymous code block is the Apex code that does not get stored in the metadata. So as I told you, there's something which you do not store. So you don't store it as a class or a method or something like that. Okay. There's something that you write and you use it. So any Apex code that you just want to quickly use, and it's a one-time affair, you don't want to write a class and method for that, you can simply use it. Use anonymous code block for that. Okay, so there's a code that does not get stored in the metadata, but that can be compiled and executed using developer console. So there is a developer console available. I'll show you this developer console thing. So you can use developer console to execute the Apex, anonymous code block of Apex. You can use anonymous code blocks to quickly evaluate Apex on the fly. So if you just want to quickly check some Apex, whether that particular two-liner Apex is working or not, so you can check Apex on the fly. Fine. Let's say you just want to create an account and check if the account is getting created or not. All right. So you can just write account A equals to new account this and insert A. Okay. For that, you don't want to write the complete method and stuff like that, or to write code that changes dynamically at runtime, or any code which dynamically changes at runtime. So for that, instead of you storing that code, you can just make those changes to the code and execute it. Okay, so where do we write this anonymous code block? Let's have a quick look. So, okay, so you can use developer console to write that anonymous code block. Okay, this developer console is again one platform which you can use for doing a lot of things which are related to your coding. You can test your code, you can debug the code. So a lot of things are available. Okay, so you for accessing the developer console, you just need to go to your setup and then developer console. Okay, it opens it up, and here you can go to debug, open, execute anonymous window. That's it. Okay, and your code can get executed from here. So whatever code you want to write, you can just write it here. Let's say account A equals new account name, sorry, name equals insert A. You just write the code block here, execute it here. That's it. The code got executed. Okay, success. If you come and see here, see the record got created as well. So something like this. If you have to small 3-4 lines of code, you just want to quickly execute it. It can be done. All right. Okay. You can also use developer console for writing some of the queries as well here. So this also has a query editor. See, you can write the queries here and fetch the data and stuff like this. Okay. So this is how anonymous code block works. It is very simple. There's not much what you can do here. You just write code and execute it from the developer console. Okay. Now let's move into the other ways of invoking Apex. So Apex triggers and Visual Force classes, I think we have done a lot of them. So we are not getting into that. We will now jump into the asynchronous Apex. Okay. Asynchronous Apex is nothing, different. The methods and the code that you're writing is going to be same. It's just a different way of calling the Apex so that it runs in a different way. Fine. So don't think that it's something new which you're going to learn, or something which is very different from what we have done so far. Okay. We have been defining methods. Okay. And with a synchronous method, what happens? The method gets executed instantly. Asynchronous Apex will have a different way of executing the same method. It can be inserting a record. Okay. So first thing is the code wise, and from the programming concept, and everything is same, just that way of calling that Apex method is changing. Fine. So I see a lot of people actually get very much confused with the asynchronous word, and they think that asynchronous is something which is completely different from what we have done so far. No. Okay. The same method can get executed, but a future method will delay the execution of that method, and a button click will require that method to get executed on the spot, instantly. So that's it. All right. So asynchronous Apex, as I told you, only the ways of calling or invoking the Apex is changing. The method that you're writing, everything is same. Okay. Okay. So the first one for asynchronous Apex is future method. Okay. What is a future method? A future method is a method which will run in future. Okay. It's a method which does not run right now. Okay. So usually all these methods, when they are called, they instantly get executed. But a future method is something which will run in future. Now you might be having a question: why will it run in future, and when will it run in future? Future can be 2 days from now, 10 days from now. When will it run in future? And why do we want a method to run in future? Okay, so let's read a little about this, and I think your doubts will get clear. A future method runs in the background asynchronously. So it does not run instantly. Asynchronously, it runs in the background. You can call a future method for executing long running operations. Okay. So if there is an operation which is a long running operation, okay, which takes a bit of time, and you don't want that operation to get executed on click of the button, so you can just assign it as a future method so that it keeps on executing in the backend. Even if you close that page, you come out of the page, it should keep on running in the backend. Okay, so that this is one. Or any operation that you would like to run in its own thread on its own time. So if the operation is a long running operation and you don't want the end user to be waiting for that operation to complete, let's say there is something a method has which will take a considerable amount of time. You don't want your end users to keep on waiting for that. So that's something which should happen in the backend, and that does not affect the results to the end users. So you can put it as a future method so that it keeps on running in the backend, or any operation that you would like to run it on its own thread on its own time. Okay, so if there is an operation that you just want to run or get executed on its own time, that's also fine. Okay, so it can, whenever the resources become available, it will get executed. All right, so that is why we use the future method. Each future method is queued. Okay, so it's lined up and executes when system resources become available. We talked about governor limits and things like that, right? So sometimes what may happen is, if the resources are not available and if your method is not future method, it will try to get executed. If it's a synchronous if it's a synchronous method, you try to execute that. Your method finds that the resources are not available. There are not enough resources. What will happen? Your method will get cancelled, right? However, if it's an asynchronous method, it will wait for the resources to become available whenever the resources become available. So future means whenever resources become available. It can be after 1 hour, it can be after 1 day. Correct? So whenever resources become available, that will get executed. So there are certain methods which you do not want to get cancelled. You just want them to get queued and get executed whenever the resources become available. So that is the thing. Okay, so that's the logic. And governor limits for asynchronous methods are also high for some of the asynchronous methods. Like uh, if you are using an asynchronous method, then you have an option of executing 200 SOQL queries. So normally you have an limit of 100 SQL queries. For asynchronous, you have a limit of 200 SOQL queries. So some governor, there is some relaxation on the governor limit also. So that also helps, right? To define a future method, so all that you have to do, we have created method, fine. Now, how do you create a future method? Just by putting a prefix, one word prefix before you define the method. That's it. All that you have to do is just use one word. To define a future method, simply annotate it with the future annotation. So this is how your future method should be written. So this is it. That's it. Okay. Nothing else needs to be written. At future. So far we have written the methods and everything, right? Any method that you want to be executed in future, you just have to write this one keyword here, start of the method. That's it. Whatever operation, whatever code you want to write inside that method, write that, finish it off, and that's it. So define the class method. If you want a method to be a future method, just write add future annotation there, and that's it. All right. Okay. So can all my methods be future methods? Let's learn a little more about the future method. Methods with the future annotation must be static method. Okay, they have to be static methods. So they have to be defined with a static keyword, and can only return a void type. Okay, so that page reference and get methods with some other return type, they will not work. Okay, only the return type should be void, means it should not return anything. All right. So these are two conditions that are there for future method. So if you want to make a method future method, the return type should be void, which means it does not return anything. So it should not have a return statement. Okay. And if you have to specify a parameter for that method, that parameter should be primitive data type. Okay. The specified parameter must be of primitive data types, which means you cannot define S object data type as a parameter for future methods. Okay, so it does not accept S objects as a parameter. You can define parameter data type or arrays of parameter data type, which means list of primitive data types or arrays of primitive data types, which is like list of primitives. Okay, we know what are primitives, right? String, integer, id, date, boolean, date time, right? S object, account, contact, these cannot be supplied as parameter for future methods or collection of primitive data type. So this is what is allowed to be passed as parameter for the future methods. Okay. Can you just think of what can be the reason why doesn't it accept the S object as parameters? Anyone? Just try to make a guess or try to use a logic.
This is Sonu. Because S objects can be constantly changing.
Right. So by the time you called that method, and by the time you say, by the time you supplied the parameter while calling the method, and by the time it gets executed, the values can change. Right. So that is it. So that's correct. So that is the reason why it only takes primitives. Correct? Because it's a future method, right? We need to understand that because it's a future method, I will call this method now, it might execute tomorrow. Okay. So if I am passing a parameter now and the method gets executed tomorrow, the values can change in the meanwhile, right? So for that reason, it does not accept any S object values as parameters for a future method. Okay. Now, Methods with the future annotation cannot take S-objects or S-object as arguments. The reason why S-object can be passed as arguments to future method is the logic that S-object might change between the time you call the method and the time it executes. Okay. So what do you do in that case? If I have to pass some records from my database as parameters, then in that case, what do we do? In that case, the future method will get the old S-object values and might override them. Okay, so let's leave it. So there's the same story. So what do we do if we actually have to pass on the parameters values, some S-object values? Okay. Can we think of a way of passing on S-object values without using S-object? Yeah, Navita says ID. Correct. So we have a primitive data type called ID. We can use that. To work with S-objects that already exist in the database, in case you actually want to use a future method and you still want to work with S-objects, okay, which already exist in the database, what you can do, the best that you can do is, we can pass the S-object ID. So instead of passing the S-object variable or data type, you use the ID data type, which is a primitive data type again, okay. So pass the S-object ID instead and use the ID to perform a query for the most up-to-date record. Okay, supply the ID. So today, while I'm starting, let's say I will call the method now and it will get executed, let's say tomorrow. So while I am starting this method, I will supply the ID. Okay, and tomorrow when the method gets executed, at that time it will do the query based on that ID. It will query the data. Okay, so that makes life simpler for that method. So just see that the following examples show how to do so with a list of IDs. So pretty simple. Let's say this is the class and there is an add future method. Okay. So for that method parameter, instead of defining the parameter as any S object, I have defined it as a list of IDs. ID is a primitive data type, right? I call it record IDs. So when this method gets executed, inside this method, whenever this method gets executed, it can actually run this query and get the values from record IDs. So when the method is actually getting executed, at that time this will get generated. Okay. However, at the time of calling the method, I had to supply the list of IDs. Got it? So that is the thing. Process records and that's it. Got it? Please let me know if you have any questions or doubts here. So that's about future methods. Okay, and future method can be any method which is void. So make sure that you are using void method, no page reference and no get method and stuff like that. Okay, so it has to be a void method. Okay, and these void methods can work with buttons also, so there's no problem at all with that. All right, so that's about future methods. Okay, now let's move into the other thing. Okay, the next way of using an asynchronous apex is a queueable apex. Okay, this queueable apex is kind of a new concept, so there's something that they have recently come up with, but still I would want you to have good understanding of it. It's like instead of making that method to execute in future, what you can do is you can make the entire class to get executed in future. Okay, so with future method, what was happening, you were just making one particular method as a future method. Okay, now if you have multiple such methods which you want to get executed one by one, then what you should do, you should put those methods in a class. So queueable apex is basically the concept of making a class which is queueable, which gets queued. Okay, take control of your asynchronous Apex processes. So the entire process, now we are not talking about one method, I'm talking about the entire process by using the queuable interface. Okay. So if you want to define a class which is queuable, you will have to use the queuable interface for that class. Okay, which is very simple. This interface enables you to add jobs to the queue and monitor them. So this interface will allow you to add jobs to the queue and monitor them. So the benefit of a queuable Apex is that this can be queued and you will have an option of monitoring it. Uh, so any Apex, queuable Apex which is queued can be monitored from here. So under setup we have a monitor section. Monitoring. See, Apex jobs. So any queuable Apex which is queued, you can monitor that from here. So what is the status and stuff like that. That's not an option with a future method, but with queuable Apex that is an option. You can always come and monitor that what happened to that process. What is the status and right. So you can queue and monitor them, which is an enhanced way of running your asynchronous Apex code compared to using future methods. Okay, so this is an enhanced way. It's a better way of running, something in the future as compared to future method, because I do not have an option of monitoring the future method. So whether that future method got executed or not, we don't get to know. That is the reason why they have come up with a queuable Apex thing. Okay, so what happens with the queuable Apex, you might have one method, but if you put it inside a queuable class, then what happens is you have an option of monitoring it. Okay, for Apex processes that run for a long time, such as extensive database operations, you can run them asynchronously by implementing the queuable interface and adding a job to the Apex job queue. Right, so what you have to do is you can just implement the queuable interface on the class, and you can use this queuable Apex for doing some long running jobs, and you can also monitor those. Okay, in this way your asynchronous Apex job runs in the background in its own thread and doesn't delay the execution of your main Apex logic. Okay, so it runs in the backend and it does not actually delay the execution of your main Apex logic. So if it is running in the background, what will happen, your anything else which is happening from on the front end, or any synchronous Apex which is getting executed on the runtime, that also does not get hampered. Okay, so this keeps on running in the backend at its own thread, and it does not interrupt any other synchronous Apex from getting executed. All right, each queued job runs when system resources become available. So same concept, same thing. Okay, the way future method runs when the resources become available, queuable Apex also works when the resources become available. Okay, queuable jobs are similar to future methods in that they are both queued for execution. So similarity is that both of them are queued for execution. Okay, they don't get executed instantly, they get queued for the execution. Okay, that's similarity. Difference number one is definitely future method is particularly for a method, and queuable Apex is for a class. Okay, now, but what is the other difference? They provide you with these additional benefits. So queuable Apex has a few additional benefits. Okay, so though both of them get queued, but there are a few additional benefits that are there for the queuable Apex. What are these additional benefits? First, getting an ID for your job. Okay, when you submit your job by invoking the system.enqueueJob method, the method returns the ID of the new job. Okay, if you don't understand this, don't worry. Let me put it in simple words. You get an ID for the job, that process that runs. For that you get an ID. Okay, and using that ID you can track or you can monitor. So that is what I was telling you earlier, that we have an option of monitoring the queuable Apex. So in simple words, there's something which can be monitored using the ID, so it generates an ID for it. So that's one advantage of queuable Apex. You can use this ID to identify your job and monitor its progress. So that's advantage number one. Advantage number two for Queueable Apex is using non-primitive types. Okay, your Queueable class can contain member variables of non-primitive data types such as SObjects or custom Apex types. Those objects can be accessed when the job executes. Okay, now because this is within the class, so you can define your SObjects within it. So what is happening? You don't have to, pass the SObject as a parameter or something. So because it's a class, so the entire class gets executed at a particular time whenever the job gets started, and the SObject values can also be fetched whenever the method gets started. So we get an advantage that we do not have to restrict ourselves to using primitive data type. We can also use non-primitive data type. So that's a good advantage. And third advantage of a Queueable Apex is chaining jobs. Okay, because it's a class, again, because Queueable Apex is a class, you can put chaining jobs here. What is chaining jobs? End of one class, you can just call the other class. So you can, at the end of one class, let's say there is a class, Queueable class, and that has 3 methods. After those 3 methods, you can write a 4th method which calls another Queueable class. So in that way, what can happen is, if you have some process to execute only after one of the processes have got executed, you can do that. Okay, so chaining jobs means you can chain one job to another job by starting a second job from a running job. So let's say there is a job 1 and then there is a job 2. Okay, let's say the job 1 is cleansing of the database. Okay, and job 2 is sending emails to some people. All right, so you can have a Queueable class for cleansing of the database. Such it goes and performs search on all the records, finds them, and cleanses the database, updates the records and all that stuff. Okay, now you want to make sure that the mails are being sent only when the database is clean. Let's say you just want to send any wrong information and stuff like that in your emails. So what you can do is you can chain the second job at the end of the first one. So chaining jobs is useful if you need to do some processing that depends on another process to have run first. So if you are depending on the first job uh, before you can execute the second job, then this chaining of jobs will help, right? So this is again something which is not available with our future method. So that is the reason why I told you this Queueable Apex is something which they have introduced new. Earlier we used to work with the future method, but now with the Queueable Apex we have these advantages. All right, you can have your S objects defined within the class. You can have monitor the progress, and you can do the chaining jobs. Right? Okay. So let's have a look at the example. So what we should be doing is, okay, for a future method, what is the way of doing it? Put add future annotation and then whatever define your method. So it should be public static void. In case you want to pass parameter, it should be IDs or anything else, but not S object. Whatever. And then your code block here. And then fine. So this is future method. Now Queueable Apex. Okay, so Queueable Apex is not a method. It's actually a class which implements Queueable interface. So for that, what you have to do? For that, you have to define the class. Give a class name. Let's say C1, and you have to say implements Queueable. So this is how you implement an interface. Okay, implementing an interface is like calling in a library of Apex code, something like that. Okay, so if you have to use a Queueable Apex, you have to implement this Queueable interface here. Okay, so you should say this class implements Queueable. Okay, If you find it difficult to understand, just remember it as keyword. Okay, so this is what should be done. Okay, now inside this, what do I need? Can I just go and define any method, or I need a specific type of method? So this is what the first line is: public class async execution. So this is the name of the class. Okay, this implements Queueable. Okay, that's implementing the interface for Queueable Apex. Then you should also define a method which is a void method, which has to be a void method, and name of the method will be execute. Because you are implementing an interface, you will have to use a void method called execute, and whatever you want to actually execute needs to be written inside this. Correct? So let's say I just want to create another account, Acme, with this phone number, insert it. So whatever your code is, that's it. So you should define, and this has to be a public method, and it has to say public void execute. Name of the method will be execute. Whatever code you want to execute, just write the code block here. And you have to write queueable context. Anything. That's it. Okay. So now consider all these things as syntax. Okay. And this part to be dynamic. Okay, so this is where you should write the code, and this code will actually get executed in the backend, as I told you, when the resources become available, right? So this is the second way, the Queueable Apex. All right, so let's say this is my code. So for this, what we should do, we should just go to Apex, develop Apex classes, create a new class, and make sure that you are writing this implements Queueable. Okay, now this code becomes Queueable. Okay, and this is the method. So the name of the method should always be public void execute. Okay, has to be an execute method. That's it. Save. Implements Queueable void execute quick save. Is there a spelling error or what? Okay. Let's say this is what I want to do. Okay, so my queueable method is ready. It can be queued, okay, and it will get executed. Okay, now how do you call this class? to call this class or to queue this class, you have to write one line of code. You have to call this method to add this class as a job on the queue, to add it as a queue. Okay, so this will actually not get executed instantly, it will just get added to the queue. What you have to do is you just have to go and write this on the developer console. So this has to be your name of the class, which class you want to execute, q1. So system.enqueue job is the method which you will have to do, and you will have to say new q1. So this will execute the job and return a job ID for you. So you just can go to developer console, say execute anonymous code block, and save this one. That's it. Sorry. Yeah. So the system.enqueue job. Okay. This method returns the job ID. So I will just execute this one. Okay. Your job got executed, and now it must have got queued, right? So where will we find whether the job has got queued or not? Under monitoring. So if I go to monitoring, I should find that. So under monitoring, go to Apex jobs. See, queuable job completed. So it was a small job, that is the reason why it got completed. So anything which is queued, which is not working, that will get queued, and you will get to see that. Okay, here. This is a job ID. Got it? So this is how you queue the Queueable Apex. All right. Okay. Now there's one more, way of using an asynchronous Apex. Queueable Apex we have seen, we understand it, how we use it. There's one more way, which is called an Apex scheduler. So first two things, the future method and queuable jobs are basically queued and they get executed whenever the resources are available. So that's one way. What if you want to perform a job on a regular interval? Let's say you just want to do something on every Friday, the code to be executed every Friday. So you don't want the Apex to get executed or on its own. You want it to get executed on a defined frequency. Fine. That is where we use Apex scheduler. When you want your Apex to run on a defined schedule. Okay, so this is simple. This is something which is simple. If you have understood Queueable Apex, you will understand this. And I'm pretty sure Queueable Apex is also simple, but this is even more simpler. And it has a better logic that if you want your code to get executed on a certain specified time. So to invoke Apex classes to run at specific times, you can use Apex scheduler. Okay, what do you need to do? You need to implement the schedulable interface. So in that we were doing a queueable interface. In this case, you have to do a schedulable interface. So all that you have to do is, while you're writing the class, you should say public class s1, whatever the name of the class, implements schedulable. Okay, so that's what we are talking about. So you should implement the schedulable interface for the class. That's one thing which is very easy, which we know how to do. Specify the schedule using the schedule Apex page in the Salesforce user interface. Okay, I'll show you how to specify the schedule. So how to define the schedule, we'll see that. And the schedulable interface contains one method that must be implemented. So there is one method which must be implemented, which is again the global void execute, the same execute method. So you can just say public void execute. and here it should be schedulable context something, whatever your code here. That's it. So this same method will be required here. Okay, so the same execute which we are using in Queueable interface, we can use the same thing for the schedulable interface also. And after you have written the code, we should just go ahead and define the schedule for it. Okay, we just need to go ahead and define the schedule for it. Okay, so before we do that, let's understand a few more details on this. So I think we have understood these three things, right? Implement the schedulable interface, that's one. Okay, specify the schedule using the schedule apex page. So there is an option of scheduling apex. I will show you how do I define the schedule. You will see that. And you should use this execute method inside the class. Okay, so this is the method which will have the code to be executed on the defined schedule. Okay, please note Salesforce schedules the class for execution at the specified time. So whenever whatever time you have specified, the code will get executed on that time. Okay, actual execution may be delayed based on service availability. So though you define a specified time, but if your resources are not available, then your action can get delayed because this is all asynchronous. Okay, so if you have defined that Friday 9 p.m. does not mean that it will exactly run at 9 p.m. Sometimes if your resources are at that point of time not available, it might get delayed a bit. But overall, it will get executed. You can only have 100 scheduled Apex jobs at one time. Okay, so at any given point of time, you cannot have more than 100 scheduled Apex jobs. Okay, so which is a good number actually. So let's see an example. So let's in fact do the example here. So schedulable class again we'll have to create. So it's again same way you created a queueable class. All that we have to do is go and write public class, let's say s1 implements schedulable, and then you say public void execute schedulable context whatever, and your code should be here. Okay, so this is where your code should be. So let me take the code from the previous slide. Let's say this is the code that I want to actually execute. So now what it will do on the defined frequency, it will go and add this account or define interval or whatever schedule you have defined. Okay, so class is ready. This is what you had to do. That's it. The class is ready. Now only thing that we have to do is, because this is a scheduled Apex, we have to define the schedule for it. When should it run? It should run on the defined schedule. So if you go to Apex classes, you have an option of scheduling Apex here. See this? Click on schedule Apex and define, give a name to the job, whatever, my Apex, whatever name. Select the Apex class which you want to be executed. So there's only one schedulable interface. There's only one class with a schedulable interface, so only those will be available to you. Okay, so you've selected S1. There's a class that I want to be executed, and here is the schedule. You want it to run monthly once, weekly once, every day, Sunday, Monday, or maybe only Monday to Friday. Okay, preferred start time. We have a particular preferred start time. Let's say you wanted to execute at 9 a.m. every day or 9 p.m. Define a start date and end date for it. Correct? So this is how your Apex scheduler works. This is how you can schedule an Apex code. Okay. Any questions? Please let me know. So we have seen three different ways of asynchronous Apex, right? Queueable Apex scheduler, and then there is batch Apex. Okay. Now, what is batch Apex? Batch Apex is another way of using asynchronous Apex. A developer can now employ batch Apex to build complex, long-running processes that run on thousands of records on the Force.com platform. Okay, so if there's a long process which involves thousands of records, then you can perform that operation in small batches. Rather, instead of starting one process which is very long, you can do small batches. Okay, batch Apex operates over small batches of records. Okay, so it operates using small batches of records covering your entire record set and breaking the processing down to manageable chunks. So batch Apex is again something which, instead of, if there is a huge data set which needs to be updated or maybe cleansed or something, instead of doing that entire thing into one method, what you can do is you can do it in small chunks. Okay, that is what a batch Apex means. For example, a data cleansing operation that goes through all accounts and opportunities on a nightly basis and updates them if necessary. Okay, so if, let's say, if you have a data cleansing activity where you want your Apex to check all the accounts and opportunities based on some custom criteria and update them. That's it. Okay, so because we are talking about all the records, then it's always a good idea to do it in batches. All right. You can only have 5 queued or active batch jobs at one time. Okay, so you can just have 5 batch jobs working at any point of time, either active or queued. Combined, we can have 5 batch jobs. Okay, so that's about the batch Apex thing. Just give me a moment. Okay, so we will continue our discussion on the batch Apex, how we can actually create a batch Apex and all in tomorrow's session. Just to give you a small brief on batch Apex. So batch Apex is again where you need to have the batchable interface implemented, so that is required, and it has 3 methods. So like Queueable Apex and Schedulable Apex had one method, execute. Batch Apex has 3 methods. One is a start method. This collects data for batch. Then there is an execute method which executes the code, and there is a finish method. So this is the actual execution. Start method is basically used for collecting the data, and finish method is used after all the batches are run successfully. So once the entire batch operations is done, at that time you can execute a finish method. Something like just sending an email to someone and informing that the batch executed successfully, something like that. All right, so I'll talk about this in tomorrow's session. We'll continue from here. Okay, fine. So that's it. See you all tomorrow, same time. Swati, 2 more days.